Mandy, thank you for getting us rolling. I'm Holly McClain. I am a counselor and a life coach, and I work exclusively with teens and young adults. So tonight I'm going to be sharing all things children, and Darlene is here, and I'll allow her in a moment to introduce herself, and she will be our co-parenting coach expert. So my background started in schools. So I started 23 years ago as an educator, and I went back to school and I got my master's in counseling, and I worked in schools as a school counselor. And then over time, that role shifted and changed to a mental health counselor within the school setting. And then I branched off and launched my private practice, which of course has counseling embedded in it, but it's primarily a life coaching practice. So I work one-on-one with teenagers, young adults, and in collaboration with their families as well. And I also run a group, which we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the presentation. So I'm excited to be here. I appreciate you all for coming and designating this time and taking time out of your life and time with your families to be here and gather some information tonight. So basically what we're going to be covering tonight in the masterclass is how to support your children or child through the divorce process, which basically boils down to communication, working with those big emotions, and then of course addressing the children in terms of how we're going to talk with them about the divorce process, which is Darlene's area of expertise, and also the co-parenting piece that Darlene is going to cover. And I almost forgot to mention as well, I have been down the road to divorce. So I went through a divorce 6 years ago, and I feel like it really takes someone who has been through the process to really understand the space that we're in and where we're at when it comes to navigating this particular transition in our lives. And those of you who are new to the Vesta community, us who participate with Vesta and share and provide our expertise, we have all had family situations where we've been affected by divorce and been down that road as well. So just wanted to say and share that too. So I will hand the baton over to Darlene so that Darlene can introduce herself as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here and sharing part of your evening with us. I'm so honored to be here. This is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm really happy to be able to share my experience and my expertise with you all. So just thank you for being here. My name is Darlene Taylor. My background is in clinical social work. I have a master's degree in social work, and in that role spent the vast majority of that part of my career working with children and families in many different areas. I was a school social worker. I've worked on college campuses for a little while. I worked in a counseling center, but almost all of my work was centered around children and families. And then in about 2019, I decided that I wanted to shift away from the clinical work and shift more into coaching. And so I launched or attempted to launch my life coaching business right around the beginning of 2020. And I'm sure we all remember that the world sort of stopped at that point. So it was a little bit of a difficult time to launch a coaching business, but I did it anyway. And so at that point, a lot of my coaching was focused on life transitions, just supporting adults through the myriad of transitions that we all go through. And then in 2021, I actually wrote a book, and the book is called It's Not About Us, a co-parenting survival guide to taking the high road. And it is about my story as a divorced mom and a co-parent, and how I got to a place of real cooperation with my parenting partner. So much so that I moved from Ohio to California simply because he asked me to. There's a lot of other details in the middle of that, but that's sort of what the book is about. So it's a memoir, it's my story, but it's also a survival guide, a guide for parents. And so since writing the book, my coaching practice has really shifted to doing more co-parenting coaching and supporting parents through this journey of co-parenting. I think, most of us, as we approach divorce, if we have children, that's the biggest thing that scares the heck out of us is, are my kids going to be okay? what can I do to mitigate the damage? And that's where I come in to hopefully help support people do that through that. Personally, professionally, I've worked with a lot of families going through this. Personally, I have been through divorce twice actually. And so I feel like been in every position in a blended family. I'm the mom, I've been a stepmom. I prefer to call it bonus mom. I've been a bonus mom. I've been a co-parent with somebody when it was really rocky, and now thankfully a co-parent with somebody where it's really smooth. And so I feel like I have some experience that I can draw from that is hopefully going to be really helpful for you all. So we're going to dive right in, and Holly will get it kicked off, and then we'll just keep going, and I'm excited.
Thank you, Darlene. Okay, let's take a quick peek at the objective for tonight's masterclass. Absolutely going to give you the big picture understanding of how to support your child during this divorce transition. So I'll walk us through that. We'll get into the weeds. I'll give you tools and strategies that you can use. There will be insights, different ways of thinking about things, so you can determine and decide, does this resonate with me? Does this not? And then Darlene will be jumping in and getting into all things co-parenting guidance. So I like to say this before any of the presentations that I put forward. I'm going to give you a ton of information. So just relax, sit back, take what resonates, leave behind what doesn't. If you walk away with a few tools in your toolbox, excellent. And know that we will follow up, and Mandy will be sending an email with links and resources and all of the things that you're getting access to tonight. So you don't have to worry about madly taking notes unless that's something that you want to do. Okay, here's our agenda for those of you who like to see a roadmap. We're going to talk about the key to happiness, which, surprise, surprise, has a lot to do with emotions and how we manage those emotions. I'm going to get into exactly how you can help your child process their emotions. Darlene will jump in with how to specifically talk to your children about the divorce or the separation or that shift that's happening in the family. I'll jump back in, and Darlene and I are both going to chime in on healthy lifestyle habits for your children, for your teenagers, for yourself. And I also want to add, everything that we share tonight, if it's pointed toward children or teenagers, it works for us. All of these tools, I use them on myself. We all have an inner teen. We all have a little inner child in there. So use these tools and insights on yourself as well as with your children. I'm also going to talk about tapping into your child's school for support. I've spent so many years in schools, and I still do some work in schools. So I've got relevant, up-to-date information to share with you on how you can tap in and use those supports. And then Darlene comes back to talk about the 4 pillars of co-parenting and then the characteristics of a good parent. So let's dive in. Happiness. What does happiness boil down to? And for those of you who are familiar with Dr. Becky Kennedy from Good Inside, she's a very well-known parenting coach. Dr. Becky Kennedy shares with us, happiness is being able to navigate all the emotions as they come up. I had a teenager say to me once before, am I in good mental health if I can be happy as much as possible? Like, if I can be happy all the time, does that mean that I'm good? No, it's completely impossible to be happy all of the time. When we take into consideration that life circumstances happen and that these circumstances are completely beyond our control, it's impossible to be happy when there are triggers that are popping up, things that are happening that we don't have control over. So if we can get comfortable navigating all the different rainbow of emotions that come through on a daily basis, it can be a roller coaster ride on a daily basis. That will create that contentment and that good mental health that our children, our teenagers, and we are all after. There's a beautiful poem called The Guest House, and I have to read this poem aloud to you because it's so meaningful. I share this with my little ones. I share this with teenagers and also with parents. Rumi wrote this poem about the guest house, and basically it relates a guest house, or when I share it with my teenagers, I say it's like an Airbnb. The guest house is us as human beings. And the emotions that come in on a regular basis throughout the day are like visitors in this guest house. And they're coming to share something with us, to provide us with information, to enlighten us with something that we need to know. So we don't want to turn them away, stuff them down, numb them out, but we actually want to entertain and listen and pay attention to our emotions. And just thinking of ourselves and our emotions as this guest house brings an incredible amount of relief from those scary and overwhelming feelings. And I will share with you, when I was going through my divorce, I remember having such an upheaval of emotion at times, often inopportune times, that it scared me and I didn't want to feel an emotion. Emotions will be felt in our body for a maximum of 90 seconds, and then we get a reprieve. I used to worry, am I going to just cry for a whole day and never stop? Our body knows how to handle our emotions. So I diverted a little bit, but I'm going to read this beautiful poem out loud to you so you can just relax and take it in for a moment here. The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. In the dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. The goal here is to befriend our emotions. Emotions 101, just a few insights for you to take into consideration. Emotions are neutral and there are no good or bad ones. Carla McClain wrote a book called The Language of Emotions, and it lists an array of emotions and the purpose that it serves in our lives. So oftentimes I will have a young person who doesn't want to feel angry, doesn't want to feel jealous. It's bad. They would rather just feel happy and be okay and put the face on. And we talk about how all of our emotions are bringing us some sort of information and some sort of value. So for example, when we think about anger, anger serves a purpose to protect us, to set a boundary. So having that type of insight to share with your child that there is value and all of the feelings that they're feeling are completely okay. There are no good or bad ones. Another message that's really helpful for our younger children is this idea that when they are feeling an emotion and they have upset and they're feeling overwhelmed, our emotions are simply energy moving about in your body with a message. So bringing it back down to basics. And our emotions are meant to be processed and let go of. So we hear a lot about processing your emotions with someone or on your own. What exactly does that look like? The overview, and then we'll go into details a little bit later. The overview is we feel a feeling. So we want to feel it. We don't want to numb it out or ignore it or disregard it. We feel it. It's often not comfortable. We interpret that feeling. Why am I feeling this way? What's happening? What's going on in my brain? What am I thinking about? And then we need to release it. And we can release it in a variety of different ways. We can cry it out. I I used to have middle schoolers that would come in and see me in my office on campus, and they would be holding back the tears, or I'm so sorry, I don't mean to cry. My room is full of Kleenex for a reason. You need to let those tears roll and cleanse and purge and let all of those feelings come out. Crying isn't the only way. We can talk it out. We can go for a walk. We can get some fresh air. There are many different ways to do this. I'm going to sidestep a little bit into communication. So now we know in general, processing feelings and addressing them is important. We'll get into the weeds with exactly how to do that in a moment. But what do we do when we have our child come to us and they've got something to say, something has happened, they're emoting? If you have a child that will talk to you, this 4-step process is incredible. If you have a child that doesn't talk to you, that's our next slide. So Dr. Lisa D'Amour is a psychologist, and she wrote a book that I believe every parent needs to get a hold of. It's called The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, and it explains all the ins and outs of what's going on inside of your teen. So if you have a soon-to-be teen or a teenager, this is a must read. And these 4 steps are from Dr. D'Amour's book. First things first, when your child comes to you, just listen. And this is the hardest part to do because we've got a plan. We've been teenagers before. We know how to handle this. We might be fired up. We want to jump on their bandwagon. We're so angry with you. I can't believe this happened to you. We have to just listen. No talking, no advice giving. It's the hardest part. Once they've had some time to purge and get that out, step 2, we need to validate their feelings. So we're not coming in reassuring them, you're fine, it's going to be okay. No, we're holding back. We're going to put our empathy forward and we're going to validate what they're going through. I'm so sorry. That's so painful. I can see how hurt you are. We're just validating what their experience is. Step 3, we're not giving any advice yet. We are paraphrasing what they've shared. Okay, so it sounds like when you were at mom's, had an altercation with your stepbrother that left you feeling XYZ, and now you've got a lot that you want to talk about and get out right now. We're just paraphrasing, so they know we're listening and we paid attention and we know their story. Then we graduate to step 4, which is the inquiry. We ask for permission. Would you like me to just be that ear to listen? Or can I help you come up with a solution? And we let them tell us where they're at. 4 golden steps.
The last step, if I can jump in really quickly, is so powerful. And I think because oftentimes, especially as parents, we just go into fix-it mode and we forget to ask if that's what people want. I can't remember where I heard this, but I like the alliteration. It helps me remember. They say to ask someone, do you want to be heard, hugged, or helped? And I've used that with my daughter and I absolutely love it. And she's stopped because it makes her stop and think, what do I need right now in this moment? And sometimes she's like, I just want to be hugged. And I'm like, I can do that. And I think it gives them a lot of power too, especially when you're dealing with teenagers, so they don't feel like you're not really listening to what they were saying.
Absolutely, Darlene. And I have many conversations with teens who share openly with me, and I will often put it back on them and I'll ask, have you shared this with mom or dad? No, because they just get angry, or no, because they don't listen. And so knowing these 4 steps puts you ahead of the game and opens up that speaking opportunity for them to feel like they can come to you and come back again as things come up. So what do we do if we have a child that keeps to themselves, likes to go up in their room, put the earbuds in, doesn't want to talk? We want to set a stage for them to be able to come to us. So a few tidbits here, and Darlene's got some good stuff to share about the second piece. But the first piece is when we're having conversation or we're talking about something, we really want to make sure that we are both, the child and the adult, are in a neutral space. So if we are revved up to gather all the information and get what we need to know from them, that's probably not the right time to approach. And if they are in a very fired up space and there's a lot of resistance, we want to let that go until we're in calmer, neutral waters. And as well, let's see, there was something else I wanted to share about that. Oh, yes. If a conversation begins to get heated, it's a perfectly great strategy to take space. And oftentimes it's nice to share this before getting into discussion that, if things ever get heated, it's perfectly okay for us to take some space. That could be 5 minutes, depending on the nature of the conversation. That could be a couple of hours to cool down and then come back to the table, because I think often, depending upon our communication style, we can want to just resolve it and fix it and power through and work through it. And then it sets us back a few steps. Another really important tip to opening up that space for conversation: shorter talk time. We're adults. It's nice to sit down and process and talk for hours. You don't quite have the capacity for that. Short car rides, small doses are golden opportunities to get a little bit out. And then you can say, oh, to be continued. Let's talk about this a little bit later at a different time, whether they're racing out of the car or you've gotten to your destination. And before, when Darlene and I were planning for the presentation, she had some great insight and a really great tool as well to share under this topic.
Yeah, I love utilizing talk time or car time, I'm sorry, driving time with my daughter. I've been doing this since she was young. And I think it's because we don't have to look directly at each other when we're talking about something big. I think for her, that gave her a little bit more freedom to say some hard things. And so there was a time that we were talking, I don't really remember what we were talking about, but I said, you can say whatever you want in this car. This car's like Vegas. Whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. You can say it however you want. It can be ugly. You can just say whatever you want and we'll deal with it and then we'll leave it here. And it's been such a cool thing because she'll get in the car and say, okay, can we be in Vegas? I need to talk to you. And I said, absolutely. And we have these conversations. And it just created this really great safe space for her. And it didn't necessarily have to be, it doesn't even necessarily have to be in the car. I have a sister, my sister, and she's got a son who's a little bit younger than my daughter. And their Vegas was this orange couch. They were sitting down and had a really good heart to heart one day on the couch. And she remembered the thing that I told her about the car in Vegas. And so she said that to her son, and he's now 15 and still is like, hey, mom, can we have some Vegas time on the orange couch? I need to talk to you. And, just being able to give them that safe space is really, really great. But I love the idea of, talking about it in the car, that short talk time. And I think it takes a little bit of the pressure off of everyone.
Oh, absolutely. I love that. Those are great strategies. Thanks, Darlene. Speak to their best side. Our teens and our children have multiple sides to them. There's that caring, conscientious, loving side. And then there's that off the rails, bouncing off the walls, not paying attention to me, just in a world of their own side. Set the intention first before going into a conversation. I'm going to speak to their best side, their best qualities. And it's surprising what comes up and comes out. You draw that side out in conversation. So setting that intention to begin with. And then, of course, we may be eager. They finally come to us. They're ready to share something. We have to implement the 4 steps because we want to keep them coming back again. So giving them that space to emote and share and asking for permission.
Can I ask a clarifying question before you go on to the next slide, if that's okay? How do you, if you are in the Vegas space, how do you address it if it needs to be discussed further, like outside of Vegas? How do you navigate that while still honoring, because you're building trust with your team?
Right.
How
right.
do you navigate that piece?
I think that's happened a couple of times before, and I said, this feels bigger than I thought it was going to be when you first started talking. And I just said, I think this is something that we might need to continue to talk about, or we might need to continue the conversation. But I think that because you've sort of established the trust with them at the beginning, at least it's worked this way for me, that she's still been open to continuing that conversation, even without me sort of putting the shroud of, okay, we're in Vegas and this is where we're going to have the conversation. But I think just, being as open as you can with them, like, wow, I'm really happy that you shared that with me. This is something pretty big, and this is something that we may need to continue to talk about. This may be more than just a short conversation.
Great, thank you.
And I'll chime in from a standpoint of when you're working with a child. So when I'm working with a child of a family in the counseling setting and also in the coaching setting, they have confidentiality with me unless, and there are 3 exceptions, and this is very standard in the therapeutic world. If you are harming yourself, you're harming someone else, or someone is harming you, then we have to break our confidentiality and we have to let mom and dad in on what's going on so that we can make sure that you are supported. So that's how that would work within the counseling or the coaching sessions. Yeah. Okay, we're diving back into how to process a feeling, because I want you, once you've got this connection going, I want you to be able to dive in and help. There are so many feelings and emotions that come up during the divorce, particularly in the process of maybe going back and forth to mom and dad's space, depending on how everything is set up, navigating this new transition. So, reminder, emotions are information, and I'm bringing in now the work of Dr. Mark Brackett. So you're going to hear some similarities as to what we talked about before. Mark Brackett worked quite a bit with a younger population, so teenagers and younger. And he has this concept of becoming an emotional scientist. So working to figure out what's going on? What do these emotions mean, so that we don't have the fear around it? And one of his primary focuses is on this idea that relief comes from figuring out what that feeling is all about and making sense of it, because it's a complicated process within our human bodies. We feel something, we're feeling it in our body, our brain is trying to figure it out, and our emotions are flooding our thought processes. So things can get a little wild and crazy, especially for our teens and young adults and children. So on the next slide, I'll share with you, Mark Brackett has a process, and it's called the ruler method, to help us go through and guide. So essentially you are jumping in as the coach to guide your young person through processing an emotion. The ruler method stands for R, which is recognize that the emotion is there. Sometimes our children stomp around, or they have certain behaviors in the classroom, and they don't really know what's going on inside. So we start with that general question of, how are you feeling? So that they can begin to share, I'm not feeling good, I'm feeling bad, I'm so upset, I'm so angry. And then we dive into the U, which is understanding that emotion. Why do you feel this way? Sometimes we just don't know. I don't know. Well, what happened before you started to feel this way? So we're doing a little bit of excavating and some digging. And then this is the gold for Mark Brackett. We label the emotion. He says, if you can name it, you can tame it. There is much relief that comes from being able to figure out and sort out what it is that we're feeling on the inside, just by giving it a label. And he has a tool that I'm going to share in the next slide on giving some language to our young people so that they know how to interpret what they're actually feeling. Then, of course, for the E, we want them to express that emotion. We want them to talk. We want them to cry. We need to get that emotion moved from the body. Emotions are meant to be felt and then moved out of the body. We don't want to hang on to those. That's where our bodies begin to suffer and feel the pain of emotions. And then finally, we can support them in regulating the emotion. So regulating meaning bringing them back to planet Earth, getting them back centered and comfortable in their own skin. And that could come from helping them look at a certain angle of a situation by reframing it and saying, well, you've explained XYZ. Let's look at it from this angle, supporting them in coming up with some positive self-talk. So if they're quote unquote beating themselves up about something and I'm so bad and I shouldn't have said that, you shared your truth and I'm proud of you for being courageous. So we can reframe that and we can start adding in some positive self-talk, and we can support them with some breathing techniques. There are many, many breathing techniques to calm the body down. One of my favorites is Peace Begins With Me. The little ones love it. The teenagers love it. And it's literally just thumb to fingers. Peace begins with me. Very simple. And they can repeat that 5 times and start to calm their systems.
Love that.
Okay, our 2 tools. Darlene and I talked about how this pie looks so yummy here. So we've got a mood meter and we have a mood pie. And both work for all ages. So the mood meter is Dr. Mark Brackett's, and he came up with this way of supporting our children to verbalize what they're feeling, because remember, if you can name it, you can tame it. So this you can pull off of the internet, you can pull this online and have an image of it up, or you can print it out. He's color coded it. You can see up at the top we have more high energy emotions, and then at the bottom across in the other direction we have the pleasantness. So we have high energy emotions that maybe don't feel so pleasant in the red, that go all the way over to the yellow side, which are more pleasant. So starting one end of the spectrum, we're enraged. The other end, we're ecstatic. So those are high energy emotions, but definitely more pleasant feeling on one end than the other. And then as we go down, we start to calm down the energy level. So we have on the more difficult feeling emotions, we have despair and we have hopelessness. Are they there? If we're looking at a more pleasant emotion, we have cozy and serene. So we can see how that's more lower energy, but the pleasantness is very different. And so they can use this, it's color coded, to figure out where they are, and they can learn new words and new definitions to help them explain and express themselves to get that relief. On the slide, we also have the mood pie. If you have a child who is a little more creative and is willing to draw out a circle and divide that pie up by the emotions that they're feeling and sharing the ratios of where they're at with those different feelings, you would be surprised when we really start to think about our own emotions. Oftentimes, we're not just feeling one emotion at a time. We're feeling a couple different things. We might be really, really mad, but there might be a little sliver of jealousy in there, or a quarter of that pie does have some sadness attached to it. And honestly, in my deepest, darkest emotional spaces, I have turned to a mood pie when I did not have somebody to talk to, and I just drew myself a circle. And I started mapping out on the pie where I was, and that in itself will bring immense relief.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of power in helping kids understand that emotions are not one-dimensional and that there is space for many, many emotions. And I think this mood pie is a great way to illustrate that. It also reminded me, I meant to ask you this earlier, Holly. Have you seen Inside Out too? Either one of the Inside Out movies, the Disney Pixar? And
I saw too.
The thing that I loved about 2 is there's a scene with Joy and she's trying to go down in the elevator thing, and she says, and she Sadness wants to know if he can go on the elevator with her, and she's like, of course you can come with me, wherever I go you go. And I was like, wow, just thinking about the breadth of emotions, and that even in some of your highest times there may be a little bit of sadness with that emotion, and that's okay. Those movies are incredible to help kids figure out and talk about emotions. But
No,
yeah,
absolutely, Darlene. And you brought up, when you shared that example, you brought something up that I would like to just briefly touch upon. Our goal ultimately is we want ourselves and our children to be able to separate themselves from their feelings. I am not sadness. I'm Holly, and I feel sad from time to time. And that's helpful because as they're developing their sense of self and their identity in these adolescent years, we really want them to have that strength of character that I can navigate these emotions. I can handle these things. And that's where the happiness piece kicks in and being happy and healthy. I am not frustration. I am not sadness. I am not my depression or any of those types of things. So it's nice to be able to separate.
absolutely. Absolutely. All right. I guess it's up to me now. Now we're talking about how to talk to your children about divorce. This is, I take a deep breath because I remember going through my divorce, and my daughter was only 2 at the time when we separated. And so I feel like I dodged a bullet a little bit with having to have that conversation. But this is one of the hardest things that you can do as a parent, to have to sit down and have this conversation with your child. It's also your first test as a co-parent, honestly, is to figure out how you're going to do this. And I think this can sometimes set the tone for how you're going to co-parent and what that's going to look like. So let's talk about some do's and don'ts. Actually, I want to draw your attention to this right side of the slide, right under how to tell them. I want to just reiterate that the most important thing that all parents need to know, no matter if your children are very small or if they're even adults and you're talking to them about divorce, it is, all children need to hear 2 things. They need to hear that it's not their fault, and they need to hear that you will always love them and always be there for them. And I know that sounds really simple, but it can't be overstated how much all kids need to hear that, especially the little ones. I like to say when kids don't have all the information, they fill in the gaps, they fill in the holes with the things in their brains, and they're small, and developmentally their worlds are this big and they're the center of their world. So it makes sense to them that if something bad is happening, it's probably my fault if they don't have any other information to plug in. So it's really important to say those things to them. But as far as the do's and don'ts go, the first one, if you remember nothing else from this masterclass, if you discount everything else that I have said for the entire time that we are here, please, 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 please walk away with this. Whatever it takes for you, just don't say anything negative about the other parent in front of or to the children. They will internalize that. It will make them feel like you hate and dislike and feel those things about part of them. They can't separate it. And that creates wounds that are difficult, if not impossible, to heal. And so if you've got to bite a hole through your tongue in order to do it, just do your best to avoid speaking negatively about the other parent. The other piece of it is respecting the right of your children to have a relationship with both of you. Neither one of you is more important. The child needs to have a relationship with both of you. So doing your best to nurture that relationship. And if you can't bring yourself to nurture that relationship, then at the very least, don't do anything to get in the way of or hinder that relationship. Avoiding sharing too much information or making them choose, especially as we're going through, in the early stages of divorce, everybody's dealing with these really, really big emotions. And it's really difficult to manage your emotions and keep your emotions over here while you're also trying to check on these little people and explain to them what's going on, and try to not have your emotions spilling over into what you're saying to them. But sharing too much information with them, may put them in a position where they feel like they need to side with you because they need to protect you, or or that you're not okay, and that it's their job to protect you. And so as much as that's why self-care is so important as you're going through a divorce, as you're going through this whole process, you need time. Your feelings are just as important, and you need time and space to process those, but that has to be in a vacuum that's away from your children, because the messiness that we're feeling, we can't understand it, so they definitely can't understand it, and that will make things a lot more complicated for them. And the other thing is, I think the biggest takeaway that's really hard to swallow is that you're still a family. It may not be the family you wanted or the family you thought you were going to have, but you are still a family, and you have to figure out, for the sake of your children, how to function as one. And that's where swallowing your pride, and that's why I called my book It's Not About Us, because it's really not. Especially when you're talking about co-parenting. And that's not to say that what you're feeling and what you're going through isn't important, but when you're talking about the co-parenting relationship and doing what's right for your children, that has to be over here, and you have to be able to step outside of that and make decisions that are going to be really good for your children. So when we talk about how to tell them, it's always best to be able to do it together. Hopefully both parents can do it together, and being able to be on the same page with your message, being able to make sure that you all are saying the same thing, and you're kind of one mind, right? You also, this helps them feel like that you're not trying to put them in the middle as well, if you're doing them talking to them together. Being clear, this is, kids will have a lot of questions, so you have to anticipate a lot of questions and try to answer them as honestly as possible. And sometimes you just don't know, and it's okay to say that you don't know, and we're still working out some of the details, but here are the things that we do know. And helping them kind of get some firmer footing under themselves with what's going to change and what's going to stay the same. Be ready for a lot of the big emotions, and for these emotions to change and cycle. Be ready for their anger, and be okay with that, and let them know that it's okay. Whatever they're feeling, it's okay. If they're angry at you, it's okay that they're angry at you, and and just be able to be willing to sort of ride the wave of those emotions with your children. Excuse me. And expect to have multiple conversations, particularly if you've got teenagers, because they're going to be processing this in stages and in phases. And, the more they think things through and the more they process, the more questions that they're going to have. And so let them know that the door is still open, and that you will continue to have these conversations, and you're working through this together as much as you can. So validating their feelings, much like what Holly was saying before, validating their feelings and being okay with them feeling however they feel. And being able to be okay with that, and for you to be okay with that. The other piece of it I wanted to say, kind of when we're talking about self-care, is being aware of your own state of mind when you talk to your children about this. That's why practicing the self-care is so important. I'm not saying to pretend like you're fine and pretend like everything's okay. It's absolutely okay for you to say, this is a really, this is a transition that's really hard for everyone. And, and I'm happy, this is hard for me as well. And here are the things that I'm doing to try to make sure that I take care of myself. And I want to help you to do the things that you need to do to take care of yourself as well. You don't want to, gloss over everything and not admit to and be vulnerable about your own feelings, but there's a way to do that in a way that's age appropriate. I mean, I took it as an opportunity to model for my daughter the things that I thought were good self-care. I remember, as we were going through it, and she was little, but I was in the middle of not a good time in my life. Not a good time. I was not handling things well. And she's like, Mom, you're so sad. And I said, I am sad. I said, but I'm not going to be sad forever. And it's okay that I'm sad right now. It's okay to be sad. Sometimes things happen and they make you sad. And, and so I said, I talked to her grandma. I talked to Granny, and that sometimes helps me feel better. And I go to the gym, and that sometimes helps me feel better. And I play with you, and that helps me feel better. And so, when you're sad, it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to, but then you just know that you're not going to be sad forever. So it was a great way to use that to talk about, help normalize their emotions by talking about your emotions and the things that you're trying to do. But obviously making sure that you're doing that in a way that's not dumping onto them and making them feel like they need to take care of you. That's the tricky piece. All right. Next one. All right. Healthy lifestyle habits.
Can I interrupt you guys before you get into the next section, if you don't mind? A
Absolutely.
couple of questions have come in. So uh, is it confusing at all to the kids? We talk about we're still a family, we're just a family that's redefined, doing activities together while while mom and dad are separated.
That's a question that I get a lot. And I hate to answer it this way, but there's no right answer. There's no right or wrong way to do that. I think that works for some families, and I think that doesn't work for some families. And I think that that changes. In my circumstance, when we first separated, there was no sharing of anything. We kept things very separate. As our relationship has evolved and our family has evolved, I was over at her dad's house with his girlfriend for Mother's Day, and he cooked for both of us. So, so I think that it's about whatever works for your family. I think, just being able to hold space for, yes, we're still a family and these are some things that we enjoy doing together. And also, two things can coexist at the same time. And also we are separated, or we are divorced, and I live here now. And this is, kind of this part of my life is over here, and this part of your dad's life is over here. And that there is some crossover, and that's okay. But I think there's no rule that says you have to do that, or that it's, damaging. And the other thing is always check in with your kids. It's ask them, how do you feel about us doing this together? How does that make you feel? Do you like it? Does it make things, confusing for you? And especially as they get to be teenagers, I think you can more so have those conversations. But I think that I'm always a proponent of, asking them how they feel and checking in with them.
And I think that you hit it right on the head by saying that we're doing this, but I still live here and they still live there. Like, us having activities together doesn't imply that we're getting back together.
Right.
Because, even as a 50-something-year-old woman, there's like still that like hope as a kid that your parents might get back together.
Right.
I mean, I'm just kidding now, but for a long time, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then another question came in about how do you, like, if you're dealing with, and this may be if you're dealing with somebody who has personality disorders, whether it be narcissism or borderline or whatever it may be, like, how do you navigate that into this co-parenting relationship?
That's a challenge. I think that's where learning how to be really clear about boundaries, and having to, I think it's, for me, I believe that it's much more difficult to have this sort of living, changeable co-parenting relationship with someone who is not stable, right? I think if you're in that situation, I think some things, it may be a situation where things do have to be really rigid, and things do have to be, all written out, and maybe all of your communication should be written communication. And maybe, you know what I mean? Maybe you have a parenting plan and you stick really strongly to it, and you have to be really firm with your boundaries, because when you are dealing with someone with a personality disorder, any ambiguity can sometimes lead to even more issues. And so it does make it very, very challenging. And I will say that I'm not, my book is about, two people who are relatively healthy, who are just trying to do the best thing for their child. And I know that that's not always everybody's situation. The other thing that I do say, though, is that it's really difficult to fight with somebody who won't fight back. Right. So learning how to not take the bait, learning how to not get, pulled into the back and forth and all of that. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. The situation, my co-parenting situation, is wonderful now. It was not always that way. And very early on, that was my task, is learning how to not take the bait in every conversation that we had. And it's not an easy thing to do, but I think it does get easier. And I think, I'll talk a little bit more about thinking about the kind of co-parent that you want to be. And that was, for me, a good anchor point, was to think about, what kind of co-parent do I want to be? What do I want to model for my daughter as far as what kind of parent I am? Because that has nothing to do with my ex-husband. What kind of parent I am has absolutely nothing to do with that. What kind of parent do I want to model for her is the kind of parent that I want to be. And that was that it felt like that there was some strength in that there was, a little bit of taking back some of that pieces that felt out of control when I really thought about that.
Yeah. And there's also coaches that deal in high conflict situations that really can help with the languaging
Yeah.
in building the communication, and I would be happy to provide resources for that as
Yes.
well.
Yeah, that's not my expertise, but I know that there are definitely people who that is their wheelhouse and they're very good at it.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Mhm. All right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
We're shifting gears a bit into the top 3 healthy lifestyle habits for your children. This is a refresher. These are basics, but so important. And I'll run through these 3 from my perspective. And then Darlene, I'm going to have you jump in because this is definitely within your wheelhouse as well. When it comes to sleep, consistent sleep patterns are everything. We want to make sure that our little ones are getting, depending upon their age range, anywhere from 8 to 9.5 hours a night of sleep. For our teenagers whom we know are consuming caffeine, going to a Starbucks, getting a coffee, we want to have caffeine rules. Drinking caffeine after 12 can affect 12 noon, can definitely affect their sleep patterns. And I will just say this once, the energy drinks are no good for their system, for their brains. So we don't want them getting involved with energy drinks either. And if we can cut down on the caffeine, that helps quite a bit. I work with teens on anxiety, and it's surprising how many teenagers don't know that there is a very strong connection and a very strong link between caffeine and anxiousness. The caffeine is creating this little false sense of fight or flight. And so grabbing a coffee and going in to take an exam is going to create some stress and anxiety around taking that exam. So one of my clients, we just stopped the coffee, and that helped tremendously with her test taking anxiety, which was lovely. It's a great idea to have at bedtime a wind down routine that includes powering down those devices an hour before bedtime, because that does affect their circadian rhythm. And then, of course, when they have better sleep hygiene, they can pay attention in school, they can get more of the information that they need, and it's better for their overall health. Now, hydration seems like a no-brainer basic. Water, water, water. That supports their little digestive systems as well, especially when we're going through things and we've got some big family changes going on at home that can be very upsetting to their gut. Keeping them hydrated can help with that aspect of things as well, for brain health, for digestive support. And then, of course, body movement, spending time outdoors. It supports their mental health if they're involved in any type of group sports program, team sports. That helps with the camaraderie. We want to keep their world turning as quote unquote normally as it was before any shifts or changes that are going on now in the family. And they need to have their social outlets. And then Darlene, you've got more goodies. I know we talked about.
I saw this slide and I, obviously agree with everything on it. But what jumped out to me is that these are things that as parents, particularly as parents going through a divorce, going through a really hard time, we really need to be focusing on these 3 things as well. I wore a lot of hats in my professional life. As a therapist and a life coach and a personal trainer and a nutrition coach. And in wearing all of those hats, I've said this to all of my clients in no matter what world I've been living in. Sleep is magic. I say that to my daughter all the time too. Sometimes she's having a bad day and I'm like, you know what? Why don't we take a nap? Or, why don't we just be done with today? Because sleep is magic. And it's, sometimes you go to sleep and you wake up and things just look a little better. So I remember it was not too long ago. I was not having a great day. I was kind of cranky, and she's like, "Mom, remember, sleep's magic. Maybe you want to just call it." She's 17. So I was like, you know what? You're absolutely right. I think it's time for me to go to bed. And it was a great thing to remember. So I just, these things are really, really important for teens, but they are just as important for us as parents. And hydration, the water, the sleep, eating something healthy for you, and moving your body, specifically getting outside in nature, just taking a 5-minute walk. For some people, this can be a really, really tough time. And sometimes it can feel like you just can't even manage to like get yourself together. And so I always say, if you can just do 3 things, if you can eat one thing that's healthy, drink 1 bottle of water, and just walk outside for 5 minutes, just get your body moving. If that's all you can manage today, that's enough, because those are some of the things that you need to be doing consistently to take care of yourself. So I just, like kind of like Holly said at the beginning, all the things that we're talking about with emotions and things to do for our kids, they apply to us as well, but this definitely does. Right. School is
Tapping into your school's resources. It's interesting, having been on the inside, to see how many resources we have available to families who are going through transitions, shifts, changes, but it's just not necessarily made known to all families within the school system. So I want to provide you with some insights here. First and foremost, every school has a counselor, even if it's just one. That counselor, part of their job is to be the liaison between their families and teachers, coaches, staff members. So if you are going through a change or a shift within your family, whether it's a divorce, a separation, a move, you can update your counselor and let them know this is what's happening in our family, so that they have an awareness around it. So you can have a confidential conversation, of course, with them. You can decide if you'd like them to share this shift and change with teachers confidentially, and have them not approach your child, or have them address and approach your child. You get to determine the parameters. Or you could decide that you just want the counselor to be aware. Maybe they can call your child in and do a periodic check-in. That is a thing. But as a school counselor, if we don't know what's going on at home, it's hard for them to jump in and provide support. So you want to notify them and get connected with them, so that they can disseminate information out that you want, or just have their teachers with another pair of eyes. So if there are any behavioral changes in class, they can update the counselor, and the counselor can update you. Oftentimes there are groups that are being run for students on campus, but these are not groups that are offered out to the entire school population. Counselors will handpick and select students that they are aware of who might be going through grief or struggling with friendships on campus. Another example are anxiety groups for anxious kids, kids whose families are going through a divorce or a big change like that. So by letting them know and finding out if there are additional resources that your child might want to participate in is another great way to utilize your child's school. And then finally, for organizational purposes. So if your child is now between your home and your co-parent's home, you might want 2 sets of materials, 2 printouts. You might want a double set of books if they're using textbooks versus the computers in the classroom. Report card notifications. You want all information going out to both parents, so that everyone's in the loop, and any updates to the emergency card that need to be made. So those are my 3 top tips in tapping and tuning into your school's resources for supports during this time.
Right. So let's talk about co-parenting. So we're through the divorce, and now it's, that we've got a parenting plan in place, and hopefully the dust is settling, and you're dealing with, okay, now I have to figure out how to work with this person. who maybe was a crappy partner, but they're not a bad parent. And we've got to figure out how to be a team and work together, work together to raise our kid. And so in doing some of the reflection and research on my book, I came up with 4 pillars of co-parenting that I think are really, if you can wrap your head around these and kind of get these as some good cornerstones to building a really good and healthy co-parenting relationship. And the first is consistency. And when I talk about consistency, it's, consistency in their schedules and consistency between households. That's a really big one. And I know that can also be a really big challenge, but that's why figuring out the communication piece between you is going to be the most important thing, because as much as you can communicate in a healthy way, at least to be able to, so that you all are on the same page, so it doesn't feel like your child is going to 2 completely different worlds when they go from your house to the other parent's house. So you really have to think about, what does consistency look like for our families? Where do some of the inconsistencies lie? What are some of the things that we need to be working on? The last piece of consistency, though, is also about, who can your children count on you to be? What can they count on you to do? Who can they count on you to be as a parent? And if you've been, this particular kind of parent, do what you can to stay in that role, to stay doing the things that you were doing, so that they can count on that. They're going to want to hold on to as much as they can during this transition time. And so as much consistency as you can give them during that time is going to be really, really helpful. Developing new routines as quickly as possible, so that they have things that they really can count on. Flexibility is the next one. Balancing flexibility with structure, and being realistic about what your family needs when it comes to flexibility. So when you're talking about building your parenting plan, what's the ideal parenting plan for our family? And how flexible are we going to need to be? Odds are one of you may have to be a little bit more flexible than the other parent. The thing to remember here is, do you want to be right, or do you want to do what's best for your kid? And sometimes those are the same thing, and sometimes they're not the same thing. And when they're not the same thing, that's when you have to bite your tongue and lean into that flexibility. My situation, my ex-husband has a very unconventional job. He travels all the time, and his schedule is different from week to week. We had a parenting plan because we were required to submit one to the state. And when we made the parenting plan, I looked at my attorney and there's absolutely no way we're going to be able to stick to this parenting plan. There's no way. If we do, he's never going to see her. And she said, well, this is enforceable. This is what the co-parenting plan is. So at that point, I had to make the decision. How important was it for her to have a relationship with her dad? Because if I did really say that she was the most important person in my life, and I really wanted her to have a good relationship with her dad, then I was going to have to be the one that was going to be flexible, so that she could actually get time with him. Now, that's, again, I'm working with somebody who was reasonable to work with. But it was hard. It was very, very difficult. So it's this idea of balancing, how flexible do you need to be with how structured do you need to be, and that will be a give and take, and that may take some time to figure out. And that's where, having to also be able to be really good with setting boundaries that are healthy for you, and that, still respect who you are and still respect your life and your time, but being able to balance both of those things. The next one is mutual respect. And this is, open communication. And when I talk about mutual respect, I've talked about, not saying anything negative to your children about your parenting partner. So it's not just about how you talk to them, but it's how you talk about them, and how you allow people in your life to talk about their other parent as well, because all of those messages sink in. So leading by example, and having that open communication and the joint decision making, not making unilateral decisions, right? You have to understand that just because you are living in separate households, they still have, unless there's some sort of court thing saying that they still have as much right as you do to make decisions about your child. So have that open communication, do what you can to build that open communication. And then the last one is trust. And this is hard. This is very, very hard, but it's about not keeping score, right? Giving them the trust that you want them to give you. right? And so not looking at every mistake as evidence that they're a horrible parent. My ex-husband sent our daughter to school with her shoes on the wrong feet consistently, like half the year of her kindergarten year. I'm like, how do you not understand why her shoes are on the wrong feet? But it's one of those things that at that time we were not in a good place. And I'm, feverishly taking notes and like with this scorecard about, like trying to, all of the things that we would have laughed about if we were still married are now evidence that he's a horrible father. Well, no, they're not, right? It's about, holding each other to reasonable standards. Life happens, things happen. Sometimes you feed a kid chicken nuggets for breakfast. It happens. It doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It means that you didn't get to go to the store to buy cereal, right? Just being able to have some sort of flexibility in that. And the other piece of trust, when I think about this, I think about trusting them to be the person that you thought they would be when you all decided to have a family. At some point, odds are you looked at this person and thought, they're going to be a good parent. I want to have a family with this person. And hopefully that was the situation, but at some point you said, hey, this is going to be a good parent and this is going to be a good parenting partner for me. So trust that just because maybe they didn't end up being the right romantic partner for you doesn't mean they're still not a good parent. And being able to really let go of that. And I talk about separating the partner from the parent. And that's probably, it's the healthiest thing that you can do as a co-parent. It's probably the hardest thing that you can do as a co-parent, is being able to recognize that those are two different roles and almost two different people. We talking about trust as well, looking at things, understanding that there's a difference between something being harmful and something being different. They may do things differently. They may do things differently at her dad's house. Does that mean it's putting her in harm's way? Well, no. Is it the way I would do it? Probably not. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's harmful or it's bad or it's something that I'm going to have to, make a big deal out of. And so you're just going to have to figure out and understand that there's a large part of your children's lives that you're going to have to kind of let go of the control of. And that's a really hard thing to do. When they're with their other parent, you're going to have to let go and trust. And it's a scary place to be, especially depending on what were the reasons behind the divorce and all of the other circumstances. But it's a place that if you can get there is going to be a really healthy place for you to be as far as keeping the kid's best interest at heart. This next slide, I really, really, really love a good acronym. So when I'm thinking about being a co-parent. So the subtitle of my book is A Co-Parenting Survival Guide to Taking the High Road. And I chose that title because I was thinking back on very early in our co-parenting relationship when I felt like things were just so hard all the time. And I was the only one doing the right thing. And I'm like, I'm on the high road. I'm staying on the high road. Doesn't matter. The high road's a great place. The high road's the best place. It's gonna work out. And so it's really, really difficult. And to stay on the high road requires you to stay in this headspace of cooperation, right? And so I looked at the word co-parent and just started thinking about what are some of the characteristics of a parent who's going to try to stay on the high road. What do you have to do? What sort of headspace do you need to be in order to do that? And so the first piece of it is character, right? Like, how do you want your children to see you and remember this journey? Do you want them to remember this as something that was really awful and hard and everybody barely skated through, or that, it was difficult, but, your mom was respectful to everybody and, those kinds of things. It's who do you want to be and how do you want to feel? Not only how do you want your children to see you, but how do you want to feel on the other side of it? One of the things that I decided very early on was that I didn't want the only person that I owed an explanation to when it came to what I did during the divorce and how I dealt with her dad is my daughter. I felt like that she was the person that I owed an explanation to. So for me, I didn't want to be embarrassed or ashamed about anything that I said or did. And by going back to that piece, that really helped me sometimes, take the high road, even when it was really hard and even when I really didn't want to. So operating with integrity, right? Being accountable to your children, but being accountable to your parenting partner, understanding that people are going to make mistakes. You're going to make a mistake because this is messy and it's hard and there's no guidebook for it and nobody knows what they're doing. So you're going to make a mistake and saying, you know what, I messed up. I messed up and I would do that differently next time. And I'm sorry. And, that's sometimes a hard thing to say, but that helps. having patience, riding the waves of this journey. It's not a straight line. It's not a straight line at all. And it's, it can be going well for a while, and then you hit another bump in the road. And, my daughter's 17. I've been separated from her dad for 15 years, and we still are dealing with bumps in the road sometimes. But you get, with patience, you get better at navigating those bumps. Having an awareness of your boundaries, establishing and maintaining boundaries for your own mental health. You have just as much of a right to have a full, healthy life as your co-parenting partner does, and just being able to advocate for yourself and advocate for what you need within that new relationship that you're building. Respecting their purpose, valuing that your children have the opportunity to have a meaningful relationship with their other parent, and recognizing that that's just as important for your child to have a good relationship with you as it is to have one with their other parents. Having empathy, understanding, having compassion for, it's very easy for us to have compassion for our children and what they're going through, but also having compassion for your parenting partner. Like, even if it looks like it might, they might be rolling through it and it's not hard, everyone's life has been turned upside down. So, being able to, as much as you can, have a little bit of empathy for the fact that everybody is adjusting to something new, to a new normal, and then normalizing the new, welcoming in new definitions of what your family looks like, not holding so tightly to the way things used to be that it just causes more problems. You take the opportunity to make new traditions and really welcome those. And then thoughtful neutrality. And that's and that's kind of focusing on what's being asked and not who's asking you. And so that's just this whole part of like, do I need to be right all the time? Really rethinking through what it means to win, right? Like, if you win if you all can work together for the best interest of your child. And so compromise is going to be a thing that you're going to have to get really, really comfortable with. And so approaching them and approaching the situation, not from a place of expecting the negative or expecting something negative to happen, but being really neutral and just, putting your best self, your highest self forward, and hopefully giving them room and permission, and hopefully encouraging them to do the same. So that's all of the info that we have. This last page is just, just our information. Holly and I both are really committed to continuing to work with children and work with families and parents as they're going through this. I have a coaching practice. I work with either work one-on-one, either with individual parents or with couples together to really navigate this co-parenting thing. And I have a book that I've spoken about, and there's a guided journal. I'm a big journaler, and I know that sometimes journaling can be really overwhelming for people. So there's a guided journal that's got some prompts, and that can help you sort of put into practice some of the tips that you get in the book. So that's available. And Holly's she's going to tell us a little bit about her coaching and some of the things that she's got going on as well.
Thanks, Darlene. Yes, so stay connected with us, because we have many ways for you to stay connected, whether it's through social media. I have added on the Stay Connected page, it's a link to the parent guide. So it's going to have almost all of I think it will have everything that was in the slides that we presented today. So all of that information will be in there. And then I also, as I shared earlier, I work one-on-one with teens and young adults. So adolescent ages from about 12 to 25. And I collaborate with parents. So I don't work directly with parents. I'm more teen-centered. But I have a new offering, which is a group offering. And Mandy and I will actually be running this group virtually. It starts in September, which is perfect timing. The kids are getting back to school. Things are bubbling up and coming up. And they will essentially spend 9 glorious weeks with us. Once per week, we will meet. And we have topics that are very life coaching oriented, everything from emotions, which is similar to what we shared with you today, about how to process emotions and go through our feelings and understanding ourselves. They'll learn how to build internal trust, uncovering clues to their purpose, conscious, healthy communication. That's a big one, especially for our teenagers. Mindfulness, and there's more. So when Mandy follows up with you, she will share our flyer for the group if that's something you're interested in. And then I will put a link into the chat in just a few moments here because we're having a parent information night about the group so you can gather more information. And I want to share life coaching sessions are not covered by insurance because they are not therapeutic. So sometimes families have HSA accounts that can help support the cost, but this group is a very cost-effective way to get all of the coaching principles and all of the supports to your teen if that's a direction that you want to go. And then also remember too, Darlene and I both offer complimentary consultations. So reach out to us, connect with us, ask questions, share with us your scenario and what's happening within your family or with your teenager, and we can help guide you from there. So,
First of all, thank you so much. That was an incredible presentation. So much information. Both of you are just remarkable, and I feel very lucky to be on this journey with you. Any closing remarks, ladies?
Just thank everybody for being here, and I hope you found things helpful. And please, I know Holly feels the same. If you have any questions or would like, consultation, we would love to talk with you.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. This does end our presentation.